I'm not a Skype person at all. Less than William E. He was there 20 minutes ago, 1946 now. Pity. 1946. Where is he now?
Well, I've added him, and I hope so. I have is the right now?
Yeah.
I have added William.
Yeah.
Nothing seems to be happening.
That's funny.
Hello, I can hear you.
Okay, you can hear us now. William, hi.
Yes, I can.
Okay, that's better. Yeah. That's better. So I think the three of us are on now. Okay, which is good. So we should be starting shortly.
A note of warning in case there's a break from. Hope you will understand.
Yeah, so you will call back if there is a break, yes?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. We need to do he said we have to do some adverts. All of them are on now.
Yes, you have to do no adverts. Go straight.
Okay. So are we broadcasting now? Okay. Good evening, listeners. You are listening to Bless Radio. Good evening, listeners. You are listening to Bless Radio. It's Tuesday night, just after 7 p.m. And this is the spiritual discussion program. This is Brother Femi here in the studio in London. Brother Sad is not here with us tonight, so I will be hosting the show instead of him. With me on the show are Brother Gregory. Brother Gregory, how are you?
I'm fine, Brother Femi. I'm in a train from Cologne to Brussels, but I'm able to join in via Skype.
Very good, and I hope you are enjoying the beautiful weather.
Yes, of course.
Excellent.
Wonderful.
Brother Rainer, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And I anticipate the question about the weather. It's gorgeous. It's like summer. It couldn't be better.
Excellent.
I hope it stays there for another few months. but that's wishing a lot.
We shall see. We shall see. It might not happen quite that way, but we'll see. And I presume you're joining us from Münster?
From Münster, yeah, my hometown.
In Germany. Welcome to the show. And Brother William, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. And it is also a glorious day here in Plymouth, southwest of England.
Excellent, thank you. Dear listeners, this is the spiritual discussion program. You can listen on www.blessradio.org, or you can also listen through tunein.com. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the work In the Light of Truth, the Grail Message by Abdushin. We have a new topic every week, and tonight's topic is a survey of creation. Please feel free to join in the show with questions and comments. If you're in the UK, you can contact us on 079 444 313 66. I repeat, 079 444 313 66 by calling or texting using WhatsApp. If you're outside the UK, then you can contact us by texting, using WhatsApp, or calling. The number to dial then would be +44 79 444 313 66. I hope that you will be able to join us. So before we actually start the program in full, we need to answer the question, what is the grail message? What is the grail message? The grail message, in the light of truth, by Abdushin, is a spiritual knowledge of life. It offers an explanation of the world, gives a picture of creation on the basis of natural laws. Its lectures contain valuable basic elements as a help in life, for through the knowledge mediated, the reader is again brought closer to life and led back to God. The Grail message deals with important fundamental questions of life by explaining in a clear and logical way the automatic working of the laws of nature, the whole weaving of creation, allowing every process to be recognized, and thereby the purpose of our whole life. It is directed at the individual and speaks to the innate experiences of the human being, their strengths and weaknesses. Thus, every reader has the opportunity to discover through the intuitive perception if what is stated is the truth. Combining with matter-of-fact reasoning, a complete world picture arises where there is no separation between the visible world and the great world beyond the five senses, nor any separation between scientific and religious striving for knowledge. I would like to give you a couple of quotes from the author of the Grail message, Abdushin. The hearer and reader of my lectures should always work within himself, keenly probing and building bridges from one lecture to the other, as well as out into the great and small world happenings. Only then will he be able to understand the Grail message and find that it gradually shapes itself into one complete whole without leaving any gaps. Again and again, in all the happenings, the reader will come back to the basic features. He can explain everything without having to change one single sentence. The word of the Grail message lives so that it permits only those who really carry the honest desire in their souls to find abundantly. All else is automatically rejected by it. For the arrogant and those who seek superficially, the message will remain the book with 7 seals. I also give a second quote from the author where he says, I wish to fill the gaps which have so far always remained unanswered in the souls of men, and which never leave any serious thinker in peace if he earnestly seeks for the truth. So, dear listeners, as mentioned earlier on, today's theme is a survey of creation. As you know, we have constantly talked about the laws of creation, about the laws of nature, and it is useful for us to actually understand what exactly do we mean by creation. Where within creation do we fit in as the world, the earth that we live in, and also as individual human spirits that are here on earth. So I am going to be posing a number of questions that we've received to the panel. Brother Gregory, are you still there?
Can you hear me?
Oh, very good.
Yeah, sorry, it was on mute. That's
okay, that's fine. So, Brother Gregory, if I could start with you, what do you actually understand by creation? Because we're talking about attempting to survey creation on this for this particular show. So, what exactly is creation, please?
Thanks. I repeat the question, which is, what exactly is creation? Creation is an entity that has come into existence through the radiations that stream out of the source of all power. At the head of creation is the Creator that made it possible for this entity to continue in perpetuity. It has different sections. It is these sections that we need to survey today. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Brother William, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Excellent. So, Brother Greg just gave us a very brief summary of what creation is. So let us explore his answer a bit further. So, in terms of creation, can you please give us a better insight into what actually makes it up? I mean, are there different regions? Are there different parts to creation? Is one higher than the other, and so on? So, if you could actually just give us a slightly more in-depth answer on the makeup of creation, and then we can now start looking at each path in more detail.
Right. Okay. Yes. Thank you very much for having me on the show, and my fellow panelists, Mr. Ibinoy, just mentioned or tried to introduce the subject matter. So essentially, creation is, by virtue of the word, a work by the Creator. So the Creator is the Almighty God, and the creation is His work. So one of the ways in which we look at it is the Creator, for instance, an artist who has created a piece of work. The Creator is separate from his work. The Creator, but you can recognize the Creator through his work. So creation is a work of the Almighty. And so the question is, creation, if you're talking about creation and how creation arose, then, we would have to basically understand that, first of all, the Creator, in his essence, is we cannot substantiate him, is unsubstantiate. And then, creation has generally, arisen out of his radiation, or out of his inevitable radiation. So there are numerous realms of creation. and all the way down from his very essence. So he's divine and is unsubstantiated. We cannot substantiate him. We cannot describe his form. And then there's also been entities that have arisen out of within his immediate vicinity, and that constitutes the divine realm, where he within his proximity. And it's also important to note that when we talk about this proximity, it's a vast distance that is inconceivable, to us human spirits. So that's the divine realm in his immediate radiation, in that very, very narrow sense of the word, and then we now, have to also understand where we fit in, So we are.
Sorry, Brother William, if I just jump in there, because you've said a fair bit. You've talked about entities. You've talked about the Creator being unsubstantiated. You've talked about the divine realm and so on. Obviously, that those are concepts which would not be readily understandable to us here on Earth, because for the average Earth man, he goes about his daily activities. He lives and he sees what he sees here on Earth. So when you're talking about divine and entities and unsubstantiated, what exactly do you mean by unsubstantiated? And can you just say a bit about the entities that you're referring to within the divine?
Well, I mean, I think what I would probably do, just to make things a little, simpler, or to try and simplify things, let us just say that, first of all, who are we, in terms of on Earth, we are human spirits. We are human spiritual beings, and our origin is in the spiritual realm, which is our own paradise. So I guess the question really would be, what are we doing here on Earth? What are we doing here, or why are we here? And I think it's to kind of hone in on the essence of what we're saying. Because the topic here is trying to get a survey of creation. We just have to realize that there are several realms to creation, and that, where we are from is a spiritual realm, and that after the spiritual realm, there is an area or layer of what we call substantiality. And when we talk about substantiality, is that which has a form that is visible, so a form that we can substantiate, that is visible, that is so that there's a visible, tangible form, and so that layer, and that's where the, for instance, a lot of the animal souls come from, and then all the way down, we now have matter, the realm of matter. That's where what we would say the after creation or subsequent creation starts, from matter itself, which is divided into several realms before we come all the way down to where we are on Earth. So I think it's important to note that there are various levels or realms or spheres in creation, and that's when sometimes it's mentioned in the Bible about in my Father's house there are many mansions. That's what is ascribed to, so I think as the show goes on, I think we would also go into more details as to how we came about, how it all started, what that process was, and I think we'll be able to throw some more light as the show progresses. But I'll stop there for now.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So, just to summarize, you've actually touched on a whole range of points. You've talked about a divine realm. You've talked about a spiritual realm. You've talked about certain things having form and others not having form. Then you talked about substantiality. You talked about after creation, and then you talked about matter and earth. So there's actually quite a lot of things that we seem to have touched on there. So to create a better picture for the listener, from what we know in science, and this question actually I would direct this to brother Rainer, so that we have more interaction from our panel. From what we know in science, we are told that creation or the universe started with a big bang, and basically everything continued from there. So, Brother Rainer, if you could try and clarify where this big bang that science recognizes, where does that fit in the picture that we were given by Brother William, about how creation really is? If you could shed some light on that for us, please.
Okay, I think I'll just summarize a little bit what has been said before, and the point we have to keep in mind that we can look at the whole thing at creation top down or bottom up. Top down means that's the way it developed, and bottom up is the way if we would look upwards. Having said that, you must of course be aware that the knowledge about the topography of creation, of course, that's revealed knowledge. No human being can in any way come to that knowledge on his own. And Abdurrahim reveals many things, and I think what we have to also do here is keep it simple and not go in all the subdivisions. And so I just repeat now, we already said right at the top, from top down now is God. He does not manifest himself as the only independent thing. And around him we said there's something which is the divine realm, which is not God, but it has been always there. I think I bring in the new concept. It has been always there. It has no beginning. God and the divine realm, his immediate radiation. So that's very important. In contrast to God and divine realm, creation has had a specific beginning. And it's always connected time with it. Time, of course, not to be mistaken, it's not our earthly concepts of time and space which hold there, but still there's time and space. Creation has a limit, has an outer border, whatever it does. We said now of this creation itself, the big compartments we mentioned up to now is the spiritual, and then underneath we mentioned the world of matter, and the world of matter we just can divide into ethereal matter or fine matter and gross matter. Gross matter is where we live. Our earth belongs to it. Everything we see and can detect with our most powerful instruments belongs to the world of gross matter. And when we know this world of gross matter, our universe, that's pretty big. We know that there are suns, more than sands of grains of sands on Earth. So if you think of the Sahara and all the beaches on this Earth, and each of these grains of sand is a sun system or galaxy. there are more galaxies and more suns than grains of sand on this earth. So it's unbelievably mind-boggling huge. But with respect to creation, it's mind-boggling small. Our universe, which we explore, is absolutely nothing in comparison with the size of creation and the different planes extending in creation. And we have to keep a sense of proportion, and what comes on reflecting on this is that we are really quite small. Now, in the world of gross matter, we have those, science describes 14 billion years ago, we know there was something like a Big Bang. Now, this Big Bang concerns only the world of gross matter. It's just the start of our universe. It has nothing to do with creation. There was also Big Bang, but this Big Bang was much, 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 much bigger. Not comparable. This Big Bang science talks about is just an after image, a repeat process on a much lower level of that primordial Big Bang, that first Big Bang. So, there was this Big Bang. Science tells it's about roughly 14 billion years ago. Quite a time span. 1 billion is 1,000 million years. From this we can derive the size of, something happened, and there was a huge spurt of unbelievable amount of energy, which expanded, simply expanded, and then eventually it formed atoms, and the atoms combined to nebulas, and the nebulas combined to stars, and the stars combined to sun systems and galaxies under the laws of physics, which are part, and the laws of physics here primarily the most, well, okay, it's all the 4 laws of physics we know, and gravitation is one very important of them. And so that is the Big Bang. It only concerns the start of our universe, and our universe is the world of gross matter.
Okay.
And or at least it might be even only part of the world of gross matter. So this is unbiblical, and actually it started from one tiny, science says it was one most tiny point containing all the energy necessary to produce that universe now, and this looks pretty much proven.
Okay.
And if we come now, okay, shall I give it back to you?
If I just quickly summarize what you've been saying, and there are a couple of interesting points that have come through. You've talked about the divine, which you say has always been there, and that's timeless. Then you talked about the spiritual, and you talked about matter as well. Now, it was quite interesting when you were explaining about matter, that you described fine matter and gross matter, where you're saying we Earthmen, we live in gross matter, and that the so-called Big Bang theory actually relates to the creation of gross matter. So that raises the question that are there two separate creations? One, the creation of gross matter, which is where we're in, and then the creation of fine matter as well, or is it all one and the same? I would like to address that question to Brother Gregory, please, if he's on.
Yes, of course. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you.
Yes, in the first case, one has to understand what's the myth that is written inside. There was never, one will repeat, never a that is only a myth. Sometimes it is, however, there was an initiation. And this
Sorry,
was a
brother Gregory, I think you're
Can you hear me?
you're fading in and out. So we only hear parts of what you're saying. So I think what I'll probably do for now is request that Brother William takes on that question, and then we'll come back to you when you're in a more stable zone. Thank you. Brother William, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, so just to quickly re-summarize that from what Brother Reiner explained, it almost gave the impression that there are actually two separate creations. He talked about the gross matter, which is where we are meant to be. He also talked about fine matter and about the spiritual. He did tell us that the divine has always been there and is timeless. So these other regions or other zones that we've just talked about now, are they separate creations, or how does one envisage them in relation to the divine, please?
That's right. Mr. Reiner, who very eloquently put that in trying to visualize or in trying to conceptualize what we're dealing with here, you can either think about it or see it from top down or from bottom up. Okay? Now, I think if we're trying to describe how these spheres were formed, I think it's better for us to go from top down to down. So let's start from above. Let's start from above and then describe the process, and then it becomes clearer what has happened here. Okay, so what it is that, like my fellow panelists have rightly mentioned, that the divine realm, which is within the immediate vicinity of the Almighty, of the Creator, has been from all eternity. The divine realm has been from all eternity, and so it is not subject to that time and space or time as we know it. So it's been from all eternity to eternity. Now, at that time, and this probably was millions of years or billions of Earth years ago, but at that time, what was happening was when we talk about the divine realm, we're talking about also entities, beings and entities that were able to come into existence within his immediate vicinity, and were able to gain a certain consciousness within his vicinity. Now and then his radiation continued up until the very end of the divine realm, where the border of the divine realm, where the radiation could not, had to be collected, and then sent back up, in that cycle, and so there in the divine realm at the bottom there, there were like precipitations, of unconscious, I would put it that way, unconscious entities, entities who could not gain consciousness within the divine realm, because in that immediate vicinity of the Almighty, the power, the radiation of the Almighty is very, very powerful, but in creation, or throughout, one of the things, the common themes, is that the unconscious, that's not conscious of, actually conscious of their existence, not conscious of who they are, there's an urge or a predilection or an urge or a tendency towards wanting to gain consciousness. So that in itself was more like a petition to the Almighty, that here you have unconscious entities, who, ideally would have wanted to be conscious, but the power and the radiation of the Almighty was just not too powerful for these entities to gain that consciousness. So, out of the love of the Almighty, he granted that request, and through an act of will and through the statement that is popular and we know it, and it's probably been used in the Bible, that word was uttered, "Let there be light," and so by virtue of that very, very sentence, creation now was able to, proceed beyond this immediate boundary, in the divine realm, and go outside, the boundary of the divine realm, where the pressure was much less because it was not in his immediate vicinity, where there was a chance to now gain that consciousness. But you see, that act of will in itself, we also have to understand, that the Creator, only the Creator is light and life. That's very, very important here for us to make note of that. So if the Creator now utters that word, "Let there be light," that sacrifice meant that, the will of the Creator, through that act of will, severed a part of himself, to make that possible, and cross beyond the boundary of the divine, and then from there radiated outside of the divine sphere. And that was the beginning, really, of creation, as it were, So this particular part of creation that was able to come into existence outside of that immediate vicinity or radiation of the Almighty is what we would have to is what is designated by the author of the Grail message as the primordial spiritual creation. So that's the immediate creation, this primordial spiritual creation, and then all the way down. So basically what this process of radiation now going beyond the boundary, immediate vicinity of the Creator, what was happening here is that there was now a slackening of the pressure because it's not immediately in his vicinity. And with this slackening of pressure, then there was a cooling off process. So if we think about what science talks about, cooling and condensation, so a cooling off process that proceeded as a result of this slackening of pressure. And so entities, were able to form, and realms were able to form, and beings were able to come into consciousness, some immediately and some not. And the ones that were not able to come into consciousness had to proceed all the way down, to realms below. So it's as a result of this slackening, of the pressure and cooling off process that various beings and entities were able to come into existence outside, the immediate vicinity. And then further down, so you have primordial creation, and then further down, again, you have creation itself, where this created beings or spiritual beings were able to come into existence, and then all the way down to the border of the spiritual, what we call the spiritual precipitation. That is where the human spirits now came into. That's where we have our origin. Now, it is important to note that this part of the Almighty, the part of the will of the Almighty that had been severed, you know, was what was now responsible, you know, for the sustenance of life, for the beings that were now outside the realm of the Almighty. Otherwise, they would have been lost, you know, otherwise they would have been lost. So that is a great sacrifice from the Almighty to man, from God to man, you know, that he severed a part of him for that sustenance of existence for these creatures that could now gain consciousness outside of his immediate vicinity, you know. So what has happened is that, you know, this process of cooling off and precipitation, you know, repeats itself as it goes down, further down, as it goes further down. So you can now imagine that, you know, in under the influence of these primordial spiritual beings, the spiritual was able to eventually come into existence, and under the power from of the spiritual, then, you know, you had the spheres coming further down that were created or that were formed. So the first coming down of matter that was formed was the ethereal matter, or what my esteemed colleague or panelist described as fine matter, or the ethereal matter, you know. And so this process again, you know, ethereal matter, you know, gradually over time, you know, with dense fine nebulae and all that, and that was how the cosmos, all other planetary bodies and all of those things started to come into existence. And I also think it's very important for us to understand too, you know, that when we talk about the after creation itself, it is very important to note that there are 7 universes, you know, very important to note that there are 7 universes. And I think in the Bible, the Bible describes it as the 7 churches, but there are actually 7 universes. And our own universe, the name of our own universe is Ephesus. And so you can imagine, even within our own universe, you know, where the earth is so vast, you know. And again, Mr. Reiner described it very succinctly, you know, the vastness of creation, the vastness of the universe, and how small the earth is, you know, compared to our own universe. Not to talk of the fact that you have 7 other universes. I can't rattle off all the names, but, you know, Pergamos, Smyrna, Laodicea, Philadelphia, you know, Ephesus, and a couple more, you know. So these are all universes, all within matter itself, the gross matter itself. So these are all very important things. So it stands to reason, you know, that even when fine matter, the fine ethereal matter came into being, it took millions of years for the formation, you know, of gross matter as we know it, because of all these the condensations, the cooling off processes. It took millions of years, so it could not have come about in one day. But I'll stop there because I don't want to go too far. These are things that we'll come to as the session progresses. But I thought it was very, very important for us to just describe it from top down to know where we are in that grand scheme of things.
Thank you so much, Brother William, for that. Dear listener, you are listening to Bless Radio. This is the spiritual discussion program on Tuesday evenings. Brother Sad and the Grail message. Brother Sad is away tonight. I'm Brother Femi, and I'm covering for him. The aim of the show is to introduce the work in the light of truth, the Grail message by Abdushin. Tonight, we are exploring creation. The title of tonight's show is A Survey of Creation. You can join in the show with questions and comments. If you're in the UK, you can do this by either calling, texting, or using WhatsApp to contact us on 079 444 313 66. If you're outside of the UK, then you need the international dial-in code for the UK, which is +44, followed by the numbers 79 444 313 66. We hope to hear from you. Now, so Brother William, from what you've explained, which I will just quickly summarize again, you talked about the divine, you talked about a primordial spiritual, you talked about a spiritual, and then you talked about the world of matter, and more importantly the fact that matter has fine matter and coarse matter, and in coarse matter or in gross matter, which is where we are at, that there are actually 7 universes. So that's a lot of things happening there. But fundamentally, and just to clarify this for the listeners, because again you use the word after creation. So you've talked about the creative word, let there be light, which I guess represents the beginning of creation itself. And then you talk about after creation. Can you briefly clarify what you mean by after creation, and then we move on from there?
Okay. Thank you very much once again. So when I talk about after creation, what I'm referring to, or what we could use another word for it, subsequent creation, you know. And so it is the realms that have arisen, you know, beyond creation, so below creation. So in the true sense of the word, you have creation, you have primordial creation, you know, and creation. Now, in primordial creation, we can say that there are primordial beings that reside in primordial creation, you know, and in creation itself, we have the spiritual beings that reside in spiritual creation, you see. So that's one way to start to look at it. So when we start to talk about the after creation or subsequent creation, then we also, I mentioned earlier on, you know, that you have as the last precipitate of the spiritual creation or the spiritual realm, you have what we will call this, you know, seed germs or spirit seed germs. That's as the last precipitation of the spiritual realm. And basically, you know, if we look at the trend that if you're not able to gain consciousness when the pressure is higher, and as the cooling off process proceeds or carries on, you know, more beings are precipitated, more entities arise, more realms that are vast, you know, are so big, come into place, you know, realms and all, and beings occupying those realms, vast realms. So the human spirit, the human, or what we would term as the developed spirit, that's, we were not able to even come into consciousness even within that spiritual realm itself, you know. And so, you know, we had to proceed downwards, you know, where the pressure of the Almighty, or the pressure was still less. And so when we talk about the after creation or subsequent creation, you know, what we're really talking about is the beginning of matter, you know. So that's where matter proceeds, the beginning of matter. So we're talking about from fine matter, you know, and the gross matter. So all that constitutes the after creation or subsequent creation, okay, which is the field of activity of we, you know, the spirit seed germs, or the last precipitates of the spiritual that could not come into consciousness at that level in the spiritual realm. So we had to proceed downwards, you know. And so the after creation or the subsequent creation is that field where we are able to eventually develop and mature and become full spiritual personalities with the ultimate goal of returning back to our origin, which is the spiritual realm.
Okay.
You know? So I think, I hope I've clarified that.
Thank you for that. So in essence, we could say that creation proper is spiritual in nature, and
Yes.
and after creation or subsequent creation, as you've said, is material or
Material,
in,
that's
in,
right.
in nature. Brother Gregory, are you still with us?
Yes, I thought I should add a bit more refinement
In fact,
in the survey
Sure.
of creation. Very, very quickly.
okay, please carry on.
There is a mention of the spiritual. Right below the spiritual, there is the animistic. And right below the animistic, there is the general world of matter. The world of matter only serves as covering for what lies above it, that is the animistic and the spiritual, in their maturing in these particular areas in the world of matter. So these three basic divisions is what constitutes, strictly speaking, the survey of creation. Basically, the spiritual, in which you have primordial and the spiritual, and then you have below it the animistic, and then finally the world of matter, which will be broken down into different categories, different realms. Like you said, finally in the gross matter, there are about 7 of them.
Okay.
This is no use trying to use the earthly metrics to understand this. The best one can do is to know about the connections between one realm and another realm and what makes it tick. That intuitively will give us a better picture in order for us to be able to grapple or understand the activities that take place therein.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Greg. But I'm still going to stay with you. I mean, we've already said quite a lot, and I have to admit that for those listening for the first time, this may sound fairly complex, what we've been describing. So I'm going to take it from a different perspective now. If we think about most religions on earth, every religion has a story about how the world as we know it came about, and the world, of course, meaning our universe, the earth and the stars that we can see at night when we look up. Now, if I use the story that we have in the Christian religion, in Christianity, we're told very clearly that the universe or creation as we know it all happened within 6 days. We're also told about the spirit of God moving over the waters during that process of creation. So what I would like, if you could shed some more light on this, is how do we relate that creation which the Bible describes as having happened within 6 days to what we've been explaining here about the different regions or the different realms that we're talking about in the survey of creation. If you could shed some light on that, please. Hello, Brother Greg.
Okay. Basically, once you understand when days are mentioned, it didn't say 8 days. It just said days. So most likely,
not quite. The Bible is very explicit. On the first day, the Lord said, let there be light, and there was light. On the second day, he did something else. And we're told that on the seventh day that he rested. On the seventh day. So the Bible is quite clear that...
But, yes, I agree with that. But what one is stressing here, the word day does not refer to the 8th day, as we all know it.
Right.
1,000 years are as one day, as we may refer to that. But these are spiritual happenings which needed to be compressed to maturing humanity so that they can comprehend pictures which they can hold to themselves to understand the happenings. In that discussion, the first day, the second day, the third day, you'll find it clearly shows you the evolution. And man was the last to be created. A clear evolution, how things started. Pictorially, when it also talked about the spirit moving on the waters, one should understand that the waters referred to here has to do with the substances or the elements or substantiality, and the spirit being mentioned here has to do
Hello, Brother Greg? I suspect you're probably still in...
The idea is not to go into gory details.
Yes, Brother Greg, we seem to be losing you. We seem to be losing you. So I'll move on to Brother Reiner. Thanks for that, Brother Greg. But Brother Reiner, just to quickly summarize what I can make from what Brother Greg was explaining, he talks about the fact that 1,000 years is as one day, and that so the days that the Bible refers to are actually not Earth days. So that leads to the question then that just as Brother William was talking about creation and after creation, can one therefore conclude that the description in the Bible actually refers to the creation of the spiritual world, and that the creation of the physical world, which we now live in, which we understand from science, actually took billions of years before we evolved into the stage that we're at now? Can we see it as two separate creations? Can you shed some light on that, please?
I think what Brother William, that of course when we say at the beginning on the first day, it says in the story of creation in the Bible, the words were spoken by God, let there be light. That was the very beginning. Now, the time scales till the creation of man are of course enormous, and we just cannot know exactly what is meant with those pictures. Of course there are things which make you think. For example, the seven days, they bear a resemblance. I didn't want to talk about it, but in the primordial, the 7 always occurs wherever the will of God is working. And in the primordial spiritual planes, if you read Abdrosheen and engross yourselves in that knowledge, and it's just revealed knowledge, there are 7 planes, 7 cascades, 7 cooling off stages. The further you go away from God, the cooler the things become and new planes form. Those things which could not form cascade further down into further distances from God. It becomes cooler again. Well, there are 7 such planes, and it seems very seductive to say perhaps those 7 days refer to the 7 primordial planes. Now, I do not think that we know how many planes there are in the spiritual. Abdushin mentions shortly a sentence about the planes in the world of matter. There are more. But okay, we definitely know that the first day starts this let there be light. That is the very start of creation, of that thing which is outside the divine, outside that which has existed forever and will exist forever. And so there was this beginning. Let me just quote that sentence, let there be light in the grail message, if I may. And we can see what happened at this moment. So it says, at one point, it was not till God in his volition sent forth the great words, let there be light, that the rays shot out over the limit. That's the limit of what has been there before forever, that the rays shot out over the limit hitherto set them into the universe. Okay, this is a difficult sentence. It was not till God in his volition sent forth the great words, let there be light, that the rays shot out over the limit hitherto set them into the universe, then in utter darkness, carrying movement and warmth. This was the beginning of creation, which gave birth to the human spirit and could become his home. So that was the first day. And of course, it's much more than 1,000 years. This sentence, one day in the spiritual is like 1,000 earth years in time. That does not refer to that thing. So, and if we read that the rays, once those words were uttered, let there be light, the rays shot out over the limit hitherto, set them into the universe. This is very difficult to understand from the English, but there was a limit which was set to the rays, and they shot over that limit. And that, of course, and then they went into utter darkness. There was nothing before, and they went into utter darkness. So this is the primordial. This must be inconceivable for a human being, the power which was then shot out into the emptiness, into this utter darkness, a big bang, inconceivable. And that's why I said before that what we have, what science describes in the gross material world, that might well be just a very faint weak after image. Now we are already completely blown over by trying to conceptualize this big bang in the gross material world. Now this one must be incredibly much bigger, these rays shooting out into the utter darkness. And rays, they radiate into all directions. So it was a kind of primordial Big Bang. And that's described here in the story of creation. So those days, and since it describes at I think it's the 7th day when the human beings come, or this is the 6th day, then God said, and the 6th day the human beings came into existence. That's very difficult to try to pin it. If the human beings, if the Earthman and the other humanities, which there are several humanities, if they were created on the 6th day. So the time when there's written days in the Bible, it probably spans inconceivable amounts of time. And I cannot say more. I think we have now a much better description in the Grail message, and I do not think it is it is not worthwhile to ponder too much and try to understand it how it was written in the Bible, because we have now a very precise picture adapted to our understanding now. But at the time, of course, there are incredibly valuable accounts for those beings there, and if they didn't, the church contracted the wideness of the meaning, the wideness of the concepts, the expanse of the concepts. It just shrank them to 6 Earth days. That's definitely wrong, and completely wrong, and does not make sense. And the words sound differently. So I would say, in that creation story in the Bible, in Genesis, those 7 days, that it spans enormous stretches of time, and that those 7 days could relate to the 7 layers of primordial creation. And but it could also not be. I cannot tell, and I think it's not. In my opinion, it's not worthwhile trying to figure that out. So I hand it back to you.
Okay. Thank
Brother
you.
Femi, are you there?
Yes. Thank you very much for that. I mean, like I said earlier on, that what we're trying to describe here, for someone who is listening for the first time, would certainly sound quite complex. And indeed, we have a question from a listener saying that yes, indeed, this is a complex picture, and the question is then asked that where did the idea of 7 realms come from, and how do you know their names? Now, I believe this is Brother Williams's explanation of there being 7 universes and attempting to name the 7 universes. We lost Brother Greg previously. I don't know if he's still on the call now. Brother Greg, are you there? No, we don't seem to have him. Okay, so I'll go back to Brother William. So, like I said, question from a listener saying, where did the idea of 7 realms come from, and how do you know their names?
Okay. So, if just to be clear, is it the 7 universes that I mentioned before that he's talking about?
Well, I mean, I'll read the question, and I think maybe there might be a mix of 2 points here. So the question says it's very complex. Like, where did the idea of 7 realms come from? And then it continues by saying, and how do you know their names?
Right. Okay. So my assumption would be that perhaps his references to the discussion or when I was talking about the 7 universes of gross matter.
I would imagine so as well. Yes, that would make sense.
Okay. Yeah, one of the things that again we must bear in mind is that the Bible is a great book, and a lot of the things that are written in the Bible are allegorical descriptions. You know, in other words, you cannot try to understand some of these things in a literal sense. You know, so because the Bible, some of the accounts are descriptions that are given way above, you know, where we are now, our gross material Earth. So where the Earth is situated, you know. So some of these things are happening way above, you know, the Earth as it is. So that's one. It's important to make that distinction because yes, what by virtue of that. it also stands to reason that the conception of time, is a lot more is different from the conception of time way up there, because if we think about, if we just think, for instance, about basic physics and, time and all that, we know that if I, for instance, was hitting or trying to chop some wood, I'm sure one of us would have experienced the fact that sometimes you would see the person chop the wood, and then maybe a millisecond later you will hear the sound, So as the ponderousness of matter is such that the concept of time, is slower, as opposed to the lighter realms way above in paradise, where things happen much quicker. In fact, sometimes word and deed are almost, something that happens as immediately. So I think that's just as a slight digression from trying to address what the questioner had put forward earlier on. But again, let's also go to what Mr. Reiner mentioned earlier on when he talked about the will of the Almighty. And so when you talk about the will of the Almighty, when anywhere you're talking about when you really talk about the will of the Almighty, that number, 7, comes into being. So that's where you start to talk about the 7 realms. So, that 7 is, yes, as a result of the will of the Almighty, the Spirit of God, or the Holy Spirit, and so there are 7 realms in the primordial spiritual, and that 7, so we're talking about 7 main realms in the primordial spiritual, and that same 7 recurs all the way down. So even in the spiritual, there are 7 realms in the spirit, main realms in the spiritual, Then you get into matter, ethereal and all that. That's 7 repeats itself. So when you get into gross matter, there are 7 universes. You see, that recurrence of 7, which is an indication, or a sign of the will of the Almighty being at work here. Now, when I talked about the 7 universes, like I said before, that the Bible, is a book that describes things of a spiritual nature, and then sometimes it talks about some of the things happening on our earth, But so when I talk about the 7 universes, if we go to the Revelations, there in the Revelations of John, it talks about 7 churches, and it talks about the message to 7 churches, and it is in these 7 churches, which is really narrowly understood as just being situated here on earth, but actually the 7 churches there mentioned in Revelations were actually talking about a message of the Son of Man, or of the Holy Spirit, to the 7 universes, which was described by the person who has transmitted it as the 7 churches. So it was a message for the 7 universes. And in the Bible there are mentioned these names, the names of these churches. And they are actually the names of the different universes. And I just mentioned that our universe, Ephesus, is that is where is one of those universal universes, or one of those churches described in the Bible allegorically. So that's the origin of it. But also, even as you explore the works of the Grail message, a lot of these things become a lot clearer, in terms of these divisions.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Dear listener, you are listening to you're listening to Bless Radio, the spiritual discussion program, on Tuesday evenings. I am Brother Femi, covering for Brother Sad this evening. The aim of this show is to introduce the work In the Light of Truth, the Grail Message by Abdushin to listeners. The topic we're discussing tonight is a survey of creation. Much has been said on what creation is, how creation came about. We just had the last panelist explaining about the significance of the number 7 and how the names of the 7 universes were identified as being information that was provided to us in Revelations. Now, moving on from this concept of how creation itself arose, a question for Brother Reiner here. Why do we need to bother ourselves about understanding all this? After all, here we are on Earth, we go about our daily activities, we make some money, and we're generally satisfied with what we're doing. Why do we need to be worrying about how creation came about and what the structure of creation is? If you could please share your thoughts on that with us.
Okay, we must just keep in mind that in the Grail message, it tells us only those things from creation with which we are directly connected. There are other parts which are not mentioned and which are not of interest to us because the whole thing is so immense. And but we have to, nowadays we have to know our part, and we have to know the relations of it all. How do we relate? And this is given in outlines, and sometimes things are filled in. Now, why do we have to know where we are? We have to understand creation, and we said, and we have to know how we are dependent on it, to get again this knowledge that we are dependent on so many things, and Abdushin shows those things, and it explains many things which we could not explain. Let me, for example, and one thing of it is, one very important thing is that this very simple concept that once that radiation shot into that nothingness surrounding the divine realm, that the further it got away from its origin, from that enormous heat power of God, it cooled down, and in this cooling down process, things could crystallize and solidify, and that became a plane in itself. Let us say the primordial realm. Then it went, but there was still things which could not solidify, and the distance had to be increased, and that was how the spiritual realm came about. And this is a completely different type of matter than the spiritual and the primordial spiritual. Completely different, and we must not talk about. But what is now very important, what Brother William said before, that at the very, very, very bottom of the spiritual realm, the weakest
precipitation.
The weakest precipitation and the weakest substantiality existing there is that which the human spirit is made of. And it is so weak that those spirit germs could not develop to consciousness in the spiritual realm. They had to sink and be sown into the world of matter. And that is incredibly important, that we now develop in that world of matter, and we want to understand things like in the Bible where it says, the parable from Jesus Christ about the sower who sows the seeds into the into the how do you say in English, into the earth, and then he waits and waits, and after some time things become germ, and little plants grow and push out of the earth into the air again, and become plants, become visible again. Like this picture there, to understand that point in the Bible, for example, we have to know that the spiritual plane, the spirit germs are being sown into the world of matter. And in order to understand that world of matter, we have to know we are so weak, and we need this world of matter to become strong. And because the matter executes resistance. If I want to do something, the world of matter resists me. And by overcoming that resistance, I steal my willpower. That is, say, I want to go to the United States from Europe. I can walk lots of resistance. If I do not want anything, I don't have any resistance. But if I want to go to the United States, I have a lot of resistance. I can walk, I can swim over the ocean, or I have to book ships, or I have to book a plane. And so there's a long time between my decision to do something and to establish it in reality, to make it into reality. And this establishing in reality, through this exercise, it strengthens. We become strong and become more decisive and more secure in everything. And that's why we always must be active and do things here on earth to become strong. But I can only understand this if I know how the whole thing hangs together, that I have a spirit core which is too immature and which needs this this immersion into the world of matter in order to become strong. And let me think, so we are being sown into the world of matter and travel downwards, sink downwards to the earth, into the world of the gross material. We have this wonderful planet, Earth, which is our home, where we are protected and we are quite safe in this otherwise perhaps quite hostile universe. But we have this homestead prepared for us where we are safe and secure, safe and sound, and can experience things. And once we die, we go again into the world of fine matter, and we have to go back home into the spiritual realm. Now, this circle out of the spiritual realm, through the worlds of gross matter, through all the planes down to the earth, which is furthest, and from this earth back into the spiritual realm, it's our journey. And we can only understand our journey if we have an overview a little bit of creation. And so that's why this overview is important. And looking at this, I can also understand such things. We know that the cycle occurs everywhere, also in the realm of animals. It's always repeated. We realize that suddenly everything is repetitions. We know that the salmon is being spawned, the little eggs are right in a little crook, a little water in high up into the mountains. Then there goes a journey. The little fish swim down the river, go further away from their home, go into the ocean, live in the ocean to grow and to mature. And one day they start going back up again and cross the oceans, try to find the estuary and go through the rivers and branch into other rivers and branch again into other rivers and overcome all kinds of obstacles. There's this enormous drive for those fish to come back to finish their life where they started it and come back as a big grown fish, and then of course lay eggs and give offspring again. But who on earth, science cannot understand this journey of the salmon, which are just outpicked. And if you know such things as that there's such a journey we do, then, and you see the same patterns everywhere, and you begin to feel home. Suddenly you can explain it. Okay, it's a miracle to science how the fish do it, and there are new theories all the time, but we know it is because it's a repetition of the great cycle we are performing ourselves out of the spiritual realm, our home, but which we had to leave because we were immature and we could not mature in the spiritual realm because we were too weak to do that. We were sinking into the world of fine matter, then to the world of gross matter on this earth, where we experience and where we grow and grow and grow and mature. And as a mature thing, we should go back up. And you see the same patterns everywhere, and it's wonderful to realize those patterns and see them in nature also. And I gave just one example, but there are many others. And
okay.
So I hand it back to you.
Thank you very much for the explanation that you've given there. Dear listeners, Bless Radio is having a slight reshuffle in the timings for the various programs, and so we normally start this show at 7 o'clock on Thursdays. On Tuesdays, excuse me. From next week, the show will be from 6 p.m. Through till 8 p.m. From 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. So as a result of the change, we will be wrapping up the show earlier today. But just to summarize what we've covered, we've taken a quick look at the survey of creation. We started off by looking at the divine realm, which we say has always been there, and this is where God exists. The Trinity, God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are from and within the divine realm. Beyond the divine realm, we talked about the spiritual world, and that the creative words, "Let there be light," where the light flowed beyond the divine, created the spiritual, and beyond the spiritual, we have the world of matter, which is where we all exist within. We also asked the question, why is it necessary to actually understand the structure of creation? And the simple answer that was just given now is that because we are from a different part of creation, we need to make our way back to where we originated from. And if you do not have the road map, it becomes a very difficult thing to do. So the responsibility lies with each and every one of us to make the effort to thoroughly understand where do we fit in the whole scheme of things, where are we from, what are we doing here, and how do we find our way back to where we originated from. Of course, there are various religions and various teachings about those cardinal questions. The Grail message, which is what this show is about, in very simple and clear terms, pulls all this together in a very unique way, and we would advise our listeners to make the effort to examine this word or this book by themselves. So, Brother Rainer and Brother William, we're wrapping up now. Brother William, are there any final thoughts or words that you would like to give before we end the show?
I mean, there's not much, I can say, and I just would like to just buttress the point that you just made. That essentially what we're trying to do is just to. We've not even been able to scratch the surface, of the work that we're trying to create an awareness of. So we encourage people to go and examine this work, objectively, that basically gives us that comprehensive knowledge, about creation, about who we are, about where we've come from, and about where we need to strive to return to. And like, the descriptions earlier given, that we need that roadmap, we need that roadmap to be able to clearly find our way back, to where we've come from. Because if we did not know, or we're not aware of the various places and what awaits us, and even the natural laws, that guide our existence, it will become a very, very difficult and a vague a journey, as it were. So that's my encouragement to readers, to take out time and examine this wonderful piece of work that was In the Light of Truth by Abdul-Sheen, and I'm sure they will be able to learn a lot more. But we have not, by any stretch of imagination, been able to do justice to the subject matter, even for which we've discussed today. Thank you very much for having me in the show. It's been a pleasure to be part of the panel.
Thank you very much. And Brother Rainer, last words from you before we wrap up?
Yes, I think Brother William has said everything. I cannot add to it. So from my side, it's just a simple goodbye till next week, 6 o'clock this time, next week. Do we know already the topic of next week's discussion program?
That will be communicated before then.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much, dear listeners. We will be back at 6 o'clock on Tuesday next week. I will now be handing over to the next presenter. Thank you so much, and bye for now.